What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 32, and I am the host, Kyle Anzalone. No Will Porter on today's episode. He will be back on Friday's show, and we're going to have a great guest on. 2020 has been an absolutely insane year, and I think we're bringing on one of the best people possible to break down some of the crazy things going on and to talk about the happening. So make sure that you are subscribed to the show somewhere, whether it's on YouTube where you get the great video content. We have a news ticker. We show some maps, display the articles we talk about, or you could subscribe to the show on your favorite podcatcher. Really don't miss anything there. We do do a pretty good job breaking down the articles and trying to describe what's going on around the world. The maps do enhance it, but are not necessary. So subscribe to the show somewhere and leave a rating and review if you can. And with that, I'll get into the episode. All right. The first article I have here is about Biden's expected foreign policy towards China, in particular the South China Sea. This is written up by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. And experts told the South China Morning Post that Biden would not soften the U.S.'s stance on the South China Sea, pointing out it was the Obama administration that began challenging Beijing's claim to the waters. So to break this down a little bit, for those of you not watching the video, this is the body of water south of China, as the name implies, and there are several countries that border it: Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Taiwan, to name just some of the countries with competing claims. And it's not just that China has competing claims with Vietnam and all of its neighbors, but rather a lot of these countries have competing claims amongst themselves, whether it's Vietnam and Malaysia or Vietnam and the Philippines, Malaysia, Philippines. There's all kinds of disputes among these waters, but the U.S. specifically asserts that China does not control as much territory as it does. Now, the Chinese claims, if you look at the map, are certainly the most ambitious, would be the way to put it kindly, but they do seem kind of absurd. Now, I don't think this is something that the U.S. military should be working out. This is almost the other side of the world. There's disputes like this all over the world, and while maybe there's a way for the U.S. to offer mediation for talks, the only way that that could be effective if the U.S. seems like an honest broker and isn't constantly using its military challenge China's claims to the area. When we talk about the U.S. military challenging the Chinese claims, it comes in a lot of ways. We sail warships to the South China Strait. We sail warships, not the South China Strait, the Taiwan Strait. There's strings of islands in the South and East China Seas that are claimed by either Japan or the Philippines, but also China. And if China starts to develop the islands by building up these reefs, turning some of them military bases, others into, I think they're doing like petroleum exploration or natural resource exploration, stuff like that. The U.S. will take our warships and we will sail them around the islands as, I guess, a display that we do not approve of China's claims to these islands. I'm sure, like, a weird thought experiment with an alien species, they would see this as like some weird kind of like nationwide mating signal or something like that, where you got a peacock around the other countries, islands and stuff like that. One of the problems with the U.S. escalating in this region is that it really doesn't make sense for the U.S. I mean, this is the other side of the world. We have a lot of domestic spending problems. We don't have the money to pour into trying to maintain or challenge China's claims here. And China has set up its navy and its military as a deterrent to defend its homeland and this region here. Maybe try to retake Taiwan or something like that. But they've spent a lot of money investing in like anti-ship missiles and stuff like that to take out the U.S. aircraft carriers. And so while it may seem like the U.S. has the greatest military in the world and China can't do anything about the U.S. sailing its warships right off its coast, if it ever did come to blows, it would cost Americans a lot of lives and a lot of treasure that would sink to the bottom of these seas. So, that it really doesn't work for the US to do anything other than these show of force missions because again, it's too close to the Chinese homeland. And with the amount of debt we have and the intertwined between the US and Chinese economy, it would wreck both. But certainly the US, I think, trying to fight this fairly offensive war would not go very well. And of course, both countries have nuclear weapons, so when it doesn't start going well on one side or the other, we probably have the annihilation of the U.S. race to look, or not the U.S., the human race to look forward to. I think that's about all I have on that. I mean, I think it kind of goes to what me and Will were talking about on last show, where there are meaningful differences between Biden and Trump, and even on foreign policy, there's differences, but on a lot of important issues, there aren't. And this is one where it looks, unfortunately, like that they're going to keep up with this very dangerous policy. I mean, hopefully, we could go back to like the Obama levels where they were sailing a warship through the Taiwan Strait once or twice a year. Now it's happening like once or twice a month, flying 60 something surveillance missions off the coast of China, flying planes and ships around China trying to carry out war games. This stuff gets very dangerous and could lead to international conflict, even if it just starts off as a mistake or a misunderstanding. Now, I expect that me and Will are going to continue to talk about Biden's foreign policy because I do think that what you no matter what your feelings are on how people voted on election day and what kind of fraud or not there was, I think Biden will be president. If you look at the margins in the states, thinking about how many votes would actually need thrown out for Trump to become president, it would have to be a lot at this point. So it's I guess something that's possible that the fraud either Trump is going to bully the courts or the fraud is actually there and substantial enough for him to hang on and become president. But I think it's really unlikely at this point that that's the case. Um, and that's not to say that there's no voter fraud at all. I just don't think the Republican Party is actually going to prove it and overturn this election, or if it was that substantial at all. I mean, I'm sure it happens. And to what degree, I don't think we know. And I've seen a lot of people posting interesting stuff on both sides of it. There have been some actual decent articles debunking some of the claims. There's a particular video in Delaware that claimed to show some fraud happening, and then apparently it was zoomed in too much, and when you zoom out a little bit more, you could actually see the election monitors are there, and so it's not every time that it's been debunked, but certainly there's been nothing near what would need to be proven to overturn the results of the election here. I also think it's pretty unlikely that the next thing we'll get into a scenario we'll get into that Trump is trying to orchestrate any kind of coup. It seems like he's trying to challenge this in court, and my guess is that once that starts to fall apart, as most of his lawsuits so far already have, he will have to, at the very least, begrudgingly leave office. Um, but the main thing being used to fuel the coup scenario here is the firing of Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. I have an article here by Kelly Vallejos that goes through some interesting, details about Trump's secretaries of defense and particularly Mark Esper's tenure. But to start off, the replacement for Mark Esper will be Christopher Miller, who is apparently a retired special forces officer. He worked closely with his old command in the military as a defense contractor and then joined the Trump administration as an aide in 2006. He served different roles in the White House, including director of National Counterterrorism Center. So apparently, he's a pretty mainstream guy from reading. It doesn't seem like he didn't put Jared Kushner or Mike Pompeo or somebody who you would think would be slotting the person in for a coup if it was that. So I think this was a policy dispute between Trump and Esper that led first to Esper drafting a letter of resignation. He was apparently going to get out before Trump fired him, but then Trump decided to fire him. But looking into the actual details of what happened with Mark Esper here and his time as Secretary of Defense. He's the third Trump Secretary of Defense. First was James Mad Dog Mattis, the former Marine general who resigned because Trump wanted to get out of Syria. Now, we could talk about how serious Trump was actually about that, because he ended up, even when he had personnel in place who seemed a little bit more willing to actually go through with withdrawing troops from Syria, Trump decided to stay. And then the second one was Patrick Shanahan. I don't think he was ever actually confirmed as Secretary of Defense. He stepped down after there was some like domestic problems that were exposed. I'm not sure the details on that, but I thought the real scandalous thing about this Patrick Shanahan guy was that he was a former Boeing executive and was agreeing to buy all these Boeing products as Secretary of Defense. Mark Esper took over, not sure when. I think in 2019. I think it was earlier this year. Maybe it was late last year. Um, and he, promised to reform and stuff like that. But at the same time, pretty much kept things how they are. The main problem in the Pentagon, and when new leaders take over, what they talk about is cutting waste, fraud, and abuse and stuff like that. But rather, as Mandy Smithberger points out, Kelly Blahos has her quoted here saying that he undermined it, that is talking about the reforms, in part by pursuing efforts like trying to weaken revolving door laws. Revolving door laws are these regulations that are put in place to say that you can't retire from the military, go work on the Raytheon board, collecting a six-figure salary for 4 years, and then go and become somewhere in the Pentagon as an official procuring weapons and stuff like that. You can't go between the Pentagon and civilian contractors that sell the weapons to the Pentagon. This creates too many conflicts of interest and creates a lot of waste and fraud and abuse. And so while Mark Esper, says, "Oh, I want to, cut down on that," him being a Raytheon lobbyist and then going forward with, deciding to weaken laws that would allow more of his former Raytheon colleagues to easily walk into the Pentagon and vice versa, it is not something that is going to improve the situation in the Pentagon. William Hartung points out that he spent a ton of money and continued wasting money on like the Pentagon's 1.7 trillion dollar new generation of nuclear weapons and the $1 trillion wasteful crappy F-35 project that of course doesn't fly right. I don't think they still really resolved all the issues on that plane, but yet Lockheed Martin is making, I think, near $100 million per plane still. So, I mean, this is, I think, kind of what you expect from a Secretary of Defense. What Mark Esper was. I mean, I guess he was pretty bad. I don't know if he was worse than anyone in particular, or if there was anyone who you would be like, oh yeah, I wish that guy was in place. But in this case, it seems like he's just kind of another part of the Washington swamp machine that carries on, making sure the very with rich, wealthy people who run these defense contractors continue to cash in from this whole military industrial complex. Kelly Blahos points out I guess, one brighter spot in Mark Esper's record is he was somewhat restrained on, the Insurrection Act and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, he did end up participating in a lot of the crackdown stuff and Trump's PR stunts. The other note you have from the Pentagon is the acting director or acting Pentagon policy chief, James Anderson. So this is a pretty high up and important role in the Pentagon. Resigned today after having issues with the White House, and that he is being replaced by this guy, um, Anthony Tala, I think, or Tata. And he's apparently said some pretty wild things in the past. And while this is a fairly important role in the Pentagon, I'm not sure how much, that this guy is going to be able to get done in 2 months. And I guess it'll be interesting to see now that his controversy has resurfaced if he'll stay in this role. All right, everybody, let's take a moment to thank our sponsor, Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde sells great CBD products. I personally like their soft gel tablets. I took one not too long before recording the show. You know, with everything going on, it's sometimes hard to clear your head and get well focused. And sometimes the CBD helps me to do that. So I took an ester capsule today. I gotta say, it's making a big deal with being able to focus and get this podcast done. No matter what's going on, overwhelmed with, the completely, no matter what side you're on, either the election is being stolen from you and you're, a cuck for not doing enough to go against it, or, you're terrified of what the orange man's about to do. COVID is still terrifying people, and we have all this going on in the world. And so, you need a way to try to help you relax. You try CBD. You can learn about that and other things CBD can do for you on the Paloma Verde website. That's palomaverdestore.com. Use the promo code PEACE for 25% off at checkout. A couple other things I want to, stories I want to touch on that I think are important in developing before I sign off here is Russian peacekeepers deployed to Nagorno-Karabakh after ceasefire deal. So this is the fighting going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Me and Will have broken down this a couple times on the show, kind of as the big developments have come in. It seemed that the Azeris were making some progress on the ground in the past couple of weeks and have now signed an agreement, both sides here, and it looks like this ceasefire is a little bit more substantial than ones in the past that fell apart almost immediately, in part because apparently the Russian forces are already on the ground there enforcing this ceasefire. The Russian peacekeepers will remain for at least 5 years, and I guess at that time they would reassess. Almost 2,000 servicemen, 90 armored personnel carriers, and 380 vehicles and pieces of other hardware are being deployed. So that the Russia is really stepping out to try to, I guess, get enforce this ceasefire. It was signed by both sides. I guess the Armenian side must not have been quite so happy with the results because there were protests there, while on the other side, the Azeri side, there was cheering among the population. A couple of interesting notes of this is that it is going to allow Azerbaijan to keep the territory it captured, including the mountain's second biggest city. And then it will also allow Azerbaijan to begin to regain. I think a small strip of land that will connect Azerbaijan to Turkey, and so Turkey is seen as another winner of this deal. As more details to come out, and of course, if the ceasefire holds together, me and will talk about an update on the show. But hopefully, this holds together and ends up being an effective ceasefire. Already, thousands of people have died in this fighting, and so the best case is for it to find some way to resolve. Now ultimately, you hope that the people of Nagorno Karabakh can find some permanent solution that works best for them, what the people of the self determination, stuff like that. But definitely don't want the U.S. enforcing it. Two more stories to talk about here today. The first one is a report from Axios, and Dave DeCamp has this written up at antiwar.com. And the report from Axios claims that Trump is going to slap sanctions on Iran every week until Joe Biden's inauguration. And so I guess part of the plan here would be to undermine any ability that Joe Biden would have to get back into the nuclear deal with Iran. Now, this is silly. I mean, in one sense, trying to undermine the incoming president's foreign policy, if that's the case, is I think a fairly reckless and disturbing move. But that may not be the entire goal. It may be more motivated just by trying to get some kind of victory before he's out of office. People are talking about him running again. Either way, whatever it is, it's still Iran is suffering from the COVID epidemic. They're apparently struggling to get insulin into the country because of the American sanctions. This is a population that's really, really suffering, and the U.S. should be rolling bad sanctions, not adding more. Now, the report says that Trump is coordinating with Israel. This is, I guess, the part of the report that makes me just a little bit skeptical of it, only because, Benjamin Netanyahu came out and endorsed the Biden presidency, or his claim to victory, I guess, is the way it's being portrayed in the media. And you would think if Trump really is the narcissist, that he would, if anything, then do things to undermine Israel or something like that to get back at Netanyahu, not enforce a stricter policy on a country, and use some of his waning political capital on someone who no longer supports him. And so I'm a little bit skeptical of this story. However, the U.S. is apparently preparing a list of sanctions that will be announced later this week. Um, so at least one round of sanctions more is coming on the Iranian population that is already suffering and dying from U.S. sanctions. It's always interesting to me what gets talked about when you're the anti-Trump faction. And so often, they'll point to kind of little things, statements he made, stuff like that. But here you've had the U.S. wage maximum pressure campaigns against, war-torn countries like Syria, destitute countries with, brutal dictatorships like North Korea, the failed socialist economy in Venezuela with Maduro, and then here the Iranian economy. And all these have just been devastated by sanctions. It's adding to the civilian suffering and deaths in all these countries. And, those lives are never talked about. And a lot of that is because that Biden is likely to continue most of these policies. Now, Iran may be one exception because, of course, his boss is the one that put together the nuclear deal. And so I'm somewhat optimistic that this actually does improve. But that said, I've seen some fairly important Democrats like Bob Menendez, who is a senator, pointing out that Iran would need to do work to get back into the nuclear deal. And since it was actually the U.S. under the Trump administration that broke it, if anything, it's the U.S. that needs to do some work to get back into that deal. This other story I have here is a conflict that I'm not very familiar with, so I'm not going to be able to talk about it in a lot of detail. But apparently, it is getting worse. And David Camp has another little write up here on it and says Ethiopia says its jets are pounding targets in the Tigray region. Ethiopia is an interesting state. I think there's a couple of regions that want more autonomy or want to leave, and Tigray is one of them. Uh, the Ethiopian government claimed a week or two ago, I saw, that there was some insurrection and that they were going to need to take action. AFP has reported that 8 soldiers have been killed so far and 200 wounded, but I don't think anybody has a good source on the numbers. The Ethiopian government is reporting that hundreds have been killed in the fighting. I'm not sure they really break down how many on what side. And the Ethiopian government, I don't think is going to be the most honest source here. Although I would think their guess would be to downplay the number of people they're killing. Although maybe they're trying to scare the insurrectionists into submission or something like that. So I will definitely keep an eye on this story, and if it unfolds and the fighting continues, do a little bit more digging into who the players are here and what's going on, especially if the U.S. tries to take sides, either sanctioning Ethiopia for potential war crimes, or supporting the Ethiopian government despite its war crimes. One of the two are likely, and I will explain why the U.S. government shouldn't be doing it. All right, everybody. I know this is a little bit of a shorter episode, but the solo shows are a little bit harder to talk for 45 minutes on. So wrap up here. Make sure you share the show. I am on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone _ Will Porter. and the usual co-host of the show, who again will be back on Friday with a great guest, is at the Will Porter at con_interest Facebook, conflicts of interest. Definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel, and when you do and you're listening or watching the video, give it a thumbs up, and then patreon.com/conflicts of interest. Thanks for tuning in.